This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing today? Did you know that you can hold physical gold and silver in your registered accounts? Did I mention gold's at new all-time highs? Yeah, it is. Anyways. The deadline is March 3rd, and that's for RRSP, TFSAs, RIF, kids RESPs, etc. Once you've got the contribution made, you can invest it into physical precious metals at any time, and Silver Gold Bull can help you do that, of course. They can also help you with their in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing precious metals. You can text or email Grahame for all the details or any questions you have around investing in precious metals, or you can just text them to see if there's any feature silver deals exclusively for you, the SNP listener. Anytime you're on silvergoldbull.ca.com and making purchases, just make sure to reference the SNP. It helps me and it helps them, and it can help you. Bow Valley Credit Union. They are your Alberta regulated, fully serviced financial institution. Alberta residents can take advantage of low or no-cost bank accounts, personal and business mortgages, loans, credit cards, and investing. They've got a 100 deposit guarantee, which is a lot different compared to the big banks with only a $100,000 deposit guarantee, as well as gold and silver in reserves. They say don't leave your hard-earned savings in trust with Ottawa's standard of inflation and devaluation of currency and taxation. Instead, shoot Leanna at BVCU membership, part of the BVCU membership team. Email at welcome@bowvalleycu.com. Down in the show notes, it is sitting there. And add an e-metals account today. Caleb Taves, Renegade Acres, they do the community spotlight here on the podcast. And wouldn't you know it, the Cornerstone Forum is heading to Calgary, Alberta, May 10th. And I'm wondering why you haven't got a ticket yet. You need to grab a ticket, folks. It is going to be a Mother's Day weekend not to forget. Bring your mothers, bring your wives, take them to the mountains on Sunday, and bring them a part of this community. I'm saying this, and it's it's like a ton of women come to it already. They already know. Bring your friends and get a table. Find a way to make it there. It's going to be a weekend, that you won't forget. And there's going to be a ton of people in attendance that I think you're going to want to rub shoulders with, which you're going to have the opportunity to do all day long on May 10th in Calgary, Alberta. So down in the show notes, the link is there. It's got everything to do with the Cornerstone Forum, all the speakers. It's also got the hotel information on there, as well as the trade show. So if you're a business, small business, you're an author, you got whatever business it is. We got a trade show happening this year, and would love for you to be a part of that as well. The Substack, it's free to subscribe to. You get the week in review every week. It's going to break down who is on and what you may have missed. I've heard it loud and clear that 5, a daily show is a lot. Fair enough. Subscribe for free on Substack and get caught up once a week, 5 p.m. Sundays, and see what you've missed out on. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, follow, retweet, all the things, because it seems like the old shadow ban is live and living. And we need to find a way to break out of those. So if you're enjoying the show, share with a friend, tweet it out, all the good stuff. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. He's a retired game warden, professional forest fighter, and a #1 best-selling author of The Redneck Conservative. I'm talking about Peter McIsaac. So buckle up, here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Peter McIsaac. Thank you, sir, for hopping on.
Buddy, I really appreciate the opportunity. We're going to have a good time here today.
You got to tell me a bit of, oh, man, here we go. All right, happy day to me. You got to tell me a little bit about yourself. I was saying to you before we started, a friend of the show, Wayne Peters, had you on, so I've listened to you there. But you'd reached out. I read a little bit about you, followed you on Twitter, etc. And I'm like, oh, this could be interesting. So, tell us a little bit about Peter.
I'm a Cape Breton boy. I spent most of my first 11 years on army bases with my dad. So my first 5 years I spent playing in bomb craters in Germany in the late 50s. And when we come back from Germany, I had no idea how much of effect that would have on my family and myself and where I ended up today. So Dad got out of the military, and we moved back down to Cape Breton, where I grew up. And the book that I wrote is called The Redneck Conservative. And I started to become, getting conservative values when I was a little kid picking blueberries. And all my buddies would watch me pick berries. And then when I got paid for them, they wanted to figure out how they could spend my money. And I didn't realize how much of an effect that would have on me. So I became a real redneck down there. I was your typical country guy. I was even a bootlegger for a little while there after I got out of university, actually. And so I went to university in Ontario, went off to I was in the private sector for a while. Then I became a game warden, wildlife specialist, professional forest firefighter. And before I retired, I set up a film production company, and I did 3 seasons of the world's first father-daughter hunt fish series. It was called Best of Bull Run, and I had more fun doing that than a man should have. And then I got involved in politics at the provincial level. I ran and had a good showing, but didn't win. And then I got involved in federal politics and realized that everything inside both systems are corrupted to the point that they can't be fixed. So when Trudeau went to visit the Ogakon back in 2000, I think it was over New Year's in 2018, and took a $150,000 bribe in the form of a trip, I filed a formal criminal code complaint with Ottawa RCMP. And Brenda Lucki got appointed to head the RCMP 6 weeks later and squashed the file. And I went, okay, I've got a new project to take on in my lifetime. I'm going to spend the rest of my days on this earth battling corruption. And so then I filed another complaint on the We Charity with Ottawa RCMP, and it was assigned a file number. And Brenda Lucki squashed that file as well, but Bill Morneau stepped down as a result of it. Nobody in Canada realizes why Bill Morneau actually stepped down. The RCMP had opened an investigation, but they just shut it down. And then when I went up to the first 5 days of the truckers thing, because I had a production company, and I said, well, let's go up and see what kind of lies are going to be told by the press. Because I was inside government for 29 years, Shaun, as a warden, and we lied to the public every single day. Every day.
What do you mean?
What I mean is we lied in any press release, anything we ever put out in that singular government department, we lied every day about everything. And 90% of our lies were by omission. 10% were just outright lies, much like you see in the press today. But most lies that the Canadian public is subjected to are lies by omission. So we would only tell a certain part of a story that made the government look good, and anything that made the government look bad didn't get told. And we would spin a story. I didn't do it myself, but the press department inside our provincial government, they controlled the message. And they even shut us down to the point we were no longer, I wasn't allowed to give interviews and the rest of it. That's pretty outspoken. And I wouldn't go into management at any time, because as soon as I did, it's sit down, shut up time. So I've been kind of outspoken.
In your 29 years, Peter, what's one of the things that they just omitted, or that you just like, I can't believe they're not going to tell the population about X?
Well, it's all kinds of things. I'll just give you one of the very last things that happened to me before I left. The provincial government spent $750,000 building a wharf to nowheres in a park that I was in control of as the district wildlife technician, and I looked after parks as part of the Crown Land side of the job. And a group of 13 people went to the province and said, we really don't want to lose that wharf, but it goes out into the Bay of Fundy, and no wharf survives out in the Bay of Fundy here in Nova Scotia. And so I put up a stink, and I said, well, that's taxpayers' money. That's insane. We need to tear it down. It's a hazard. And I said, there's no way we're throwing $750,000 at that. And the day I retired, they went back in and put that wharf in, and it's a wharf that you can't tie a boat to. They went in and took a grinder, cut the ladders off it, put armor stone all around it so none of the kids could jump off it into the water anymore. And it doesn't go far enough out into the water to actually park a boat. So that type of stuff happened nonstop. And we just flat out lied, said, no, we're doing it for the community, and one thing or another. One of the things as wildlife specialists in the province, when I was a game warden, we had coyotes attacking people in Nova Scotia. And there was a movie done, actually, I think CBC or Film Board of Canada did a a movie on it, and it's called Bad Coyote, and it's when coyotes killed a girl up in the Cape Breton Highlands. And I'm in that movie actually, but I couldn't really tell people what was happening until I retired, because if you got out of line, you're going under the bus, straight up, simple. In the government in Nova Scotia, you start talking about what's happening inside government, and you're going under the bus. You're gone. So I told what was really happening. I think that year we had something like 18 attacks on people in Nova Scotia, and only 2 or 3 of them made it into the news, and we kept everything covered up. And it was just constant lies, buddy. Never ended. Spray programs, money spent on projects that were nonsensical. Parks, for example, that got started, and then, just because somebody behind the scenes was getting greased to start construction, then then it would just go away, and it was just nonstop. Lying about budgets, they just lied about everything. Didn't matter what it was.
When you say spray programs, what do you mean?
Well, they have spray programs down here in Nova Scotia where they use glyphosate on spraying woodlands. And any of the side effects on that, there were some activist groups. And so what happened is the government just, if you were in an activist group, they either just called you a conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theorist or any number of things to shut you up. But, the long-term side effects of glyphosate now, I believe Monsanto's paid out billions in lawsuits where people have got cancer from being exposed to glyphosate. And we constantly said, no, it's nothing to worry about here. Don't worry about it, guys. Look the other way. I'll give you an example. We had, in my line of work, because I'm a professional forest fire fighter, and this really put me on the map here in 2023, actually, was we had the largest forest fire in Nova Scotia's history. And the government said, oh, no, this is wet. This is climate change. Well, that's straight up. Am I allowed to swear on here at all?
Sure.
Okay, so it's just straight up bullshit, right? So what ended up happening, Shaun, was they ended up with it was the largest fire in our history, and it was straight up arson. And charges have been laid since. But when the RCMP first went in, because they were taking their orders from the federal government and they still had to push the climate change agenda, they refused to lay charges, said not enough evidence to lay charges. Finally, DNR went in and laid charges for arson. And because I'm trained as a forest fire investigator, as soon as I looked at the aerial photography and the fingers and the starting point of the fire, I knew, okay, so this needs to be investigated for arson immediately. Everything about it said arson. So what happened here in Nova Scotia, we had the cost of that fire. That's a big deal down here. We're a small province, 1.1 million residents. And that fire cost us over $200 million in damages. Homes were burning down. So my wife and I we were at a point where we had our gear packed because it looked like we might be evacuated as a result of that fire. And I said, well, this is nonsense. I'm still a qualified forest firefighter. So I put together a team of 6 professionals, guys who had retired, that were willing to come back in. And the premier was on the air every day crying for help. And this is just more lying, right? We need help. Anybody that can help us out. So I put together a team of highly qualified experts. Between the 6 of us, we probably had close to 200 years forest firefighting experience. And I've been on fires as big as 60,000 acres. So we offered our services up to the province, and the premier's standing on TV telling people, anybody that can help would love to have your help. And at the same time, they turned us down 5 days in a row. And instead of bringing in local guys who knew the area and knew a lot of the teams on the ground and could have assisted upper level in incident command, they ended up, they just refused to take us. And then they brought in firefighters from, I think it was South Africa, the U.S., and out west. And none of them had any experience fighting in our, what's called the Acadian Forest region. And then we had 3 weeks of record-breaking rain, and the premier kept the province under a state of emergency and wouldn't allow people to travel in the woods. So I got pissed off, and I sat right where I'm sitting right now, and I made a video and explained to the people in Nova Scotia what was happening. And I put it on a Facebook site, and I think I got 82 or 86,000 views, but it got picked up on TikTok and got 177 million views. So I started getting phone calls from all across the world, Europe. Reiner Fullman got a hold of me. I don't know if you know who Reiner is, but Reiner's the guy who sued Deutsche Bank and Volkswagen in huge class action suits and won. And then he was going after every world government for violating the Nuremberg Code in relation to mRNA vaccines. And he said, Pete, what the hell's going on in Canada in regards to forest fires? So I told him the truth. And so that's why that ended up getting all those views. I was getting calls from Australia and New Zealand, South America, everywhere. So then I said, you know what? I'm going to make a point of spending the rest of my days battling corruption, because I see it every day. And it just happened here in the last, actually out in BC, the last provincial election was basically stolen. And the same thing just happened down here in Nova Scotia. And go ahead.
Well, before we get to elections, I got a question in the back of my brain because it kind of coincides with a previous guest I had on. And it's going to derail this for a few minutes, folks, and then we'll get into politics. But you mentioned as a kid you were in Germany playing around in bunkers, and you didn't realize how much of an effect that would have on your family. What did you mean by that? So
Dad was in the military. He was Armored Corps, right? Back then he was a Centurion tank commander when we were in Germany. So what Dad had an opportunity, I'll give you an example. As a little kid, on Sundays, we'd go out and we'd go to all these military different things that were going on. My parents took me to visit real gypsy encampments. Dad had a chance to go and visit, all of the, I think he was to Auschwitz and Birkenau, a bunch of different places, right? And at the time I was young enough, even in the trash heaps behind the PMQs, or where we were situated, there were still old firearms and helmets and all kinds of leftover stuff from the war. There were still bombed out vehicles in the fields across from us. All around where we were as a little kid, man, you could find a million places to hide and play hide and seek. And that'd be where bombs were dropped. There was bullet holes in the walls. There was all kinds of stuff. We'd go out and on Sundays, and I remember them draining dikes, and you'd find 2 or 3 tanks that were exposed underwater, and they were still finding bodies and everything. You got to remember, that was only a dozen. I was over there. My first one over there was only 13 years after World War II. And I look back 13 years now, and that's like the blink of an eye. So we saw a lot of stuff. I remember Dad talking to me about, seeing lamps of tattoos that were made out of the skin, taken off the tattoo of Jewish prisoners. And if it was a nice tattoo, they'd make a lampshade out of it. People don't realize the horrors of a socialist government if they get in power. And so I'm fighting tooth and nail right now to keep Mark Carney out of power here in Canada. So my parents came home with a real hate on for not just the German government, because you got to remember the populace supported them. I believe at the time that only 8% of the population was actually Nazi Party members, but everybody else knew what was going on. And they were basically crushed over the fact that Germany didn't win. And so the other big lesson that I learned when I came home from there was how effective PSYOPs can be. The Tavistock Institute perfected mass brainwashing, and then Joseph Goebbels, he just brought it to a whole new level. And if you want to see what's happening right now in Canadian politics with Mark Carney, that was everything you're seeing was perfected by Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister for Adolf Hitler.
So let's fast forward then to where we sit right now, because if you would have asked me 6 months ago, well, I probably said it on here how many times, folks. Like, to me, it looked like Pierre Poilievre was going to win in a landslide. Like everybody was just waiting for Singh to get past his day where finally he gets his pension, and then the day things are going to be pulled and on and on and on. And since that time, Shaun continues to be wrong. I'll stick my hand up. I've been wrong an awful lot. And I look at this and I had this cold chill go through me the other day where I'm like, Mark Carney is going to be our next Prime Minister of Canada. Now, I don't know how long for, and I'd be curious your thoughts. And then I'd also be curious your thoughts on whether or not he can win an election. As we talk about Nova Scotia, because I got to hear about that. And we covered BC here. So It's like knowing the things, understanding the U.S., what happened. To me, I'm like, okay, Peter, lay some of that Cape Breton attitude on me.
Well, so here's, and maybe I'm wrong, but here's what's happening right now. So Joseph Goebbels, one of his tactics was, he said you can control millions of people. All you have to do is declare an enemy, wrap the battle in the flag, which is what's happening in Canada. It's sprayed out of Joseph Goebbels' handbook. He said, so what they're trying to do is the Liberal Party is trying to declare war on Trump, and he's wrapping it in the Canadian flag with Team Canada. And if you don't support everything that they're doing, well, then you're just not a patriot to Canada, and you'll be deemed as such, and you'll be censored. So I'm six. I'm going to just turn to 67 here shortly. If you ever told me that one day I'd see Canadians booing the American national anthem, I just flat out wouldn't have believed you. But that's the power of mind control and psyops that are well coordinated. I'll give you an example. Mark Carney just did an interview. I think it was last night in French. And he just fumbled it. It was an absolute disaster. And then I looked at some of the stats and the amount of people watching that. It was something like 8,200 people. Now, at the same time, Pierre Poilievre, when he does something, you get 180,000, 200,000 people watching. So then I caught the other day some stuff from Mark Carney with artificial intelligence created pictures, making it look like there was more of a crowd. Somebody pointed it out. I blew it up and I looked at it because I use AI on a lot of things. And I said, okay, this is 100 straight grade A, 100% propaganda bullshit. So what's happening is the CBC and anybody that got funded through the, what was it called? The Truth and News Initiative. That Trudeau, he dumped another 700 million into everybody who would back him. So CBC realizes if Pierre Poilievre gets in, the news section of CBC is finished. So everybody over there is in a fight for their life in order to keep their jobs. Categorically, we're being lied to on a daily basis. You cannot believe a single word coming out of mainstream media. It's a massive, highly well coordinated, almost to the level of a highly military operation in order to put Mark Carney, who's quite simply the greasiest, most dangerous politician, or not even a real politician. He's what you call, he's the poster child for the backroom boy, and he's the most dangerous person to come into Canadian politics in the last 3 decades.
So obviously he has a chance at winning then, is what you're pointing out. But you're also pointing out they're using a massive psyop to say that he's got more favor than what he actually does.
So if you look over anything on Facebook, bots are being used because the Liberals get caught doing it in every election campaign. When they run election campaigns, they get caught running little bot farms where they generate fake support. It was much like when the COVID vaccine came out and they were saying, well, we got 90% support from everybody, and it turned out to be categorical more bullshit. I'm serious. The level of bullshit from the government and mainstream media, it can't even be handled with a shovel anymore. You need a backhoe and maybe even a front end loader. You categorically have to learn to question everything. When I was a little kid, my mom used to read to us all the time when we came back from Germany. It was a thing. And by the time I was 6 years old, she had bought me a set of encyclopedias. They were called Art Linkletter encyclopedias, and you got them for buying groceries. By the time I was 6 years old, I'd read that set of encyclopedias from cover to cover. And I learned to question everything. And my dad was a military guy, and he was more used to taking orders, but he got busted back 3 times for questioning things that would have got him and some of his men killed. And so Dad said, even when I was a game warden, was carrying a gun for the government. He used to say, there's no goddamn way, Pete. He said that the government's going to lie to us about those big issues. And I said, Dad, I was there in the middle of it. That's 180 degree, diametrically opposed. It just happened because I was in the middle of it. And he'd say, well, why would they lie about that? And I would, back then, I was busy trying to raise a family. I had 4 kids and stuff. And it's like a lot of people in Canada. Here's what's happening, Shaun. So many people are busy trying to keep their head above water and not sink financially. They don't have time to do the research that you and I do. And they're get buried by propaganda. Mark Carney, you cannot pick a worse person. That guy's been to the Bilderberg Group meetings 8 times. He's been to a Bohemian Grove, Council of 300. This guy is the absolute slime cesspool of the worst of the worst. You could not put a worse, well, maybe Gerald Butts would be a close second. But the reality of it is you could not possibly put a worse person in. So all the support for him is being manufactured. None of it's true. You start doing the research in it, you're going to be I just listen to stuff on the news and I go, okay, they're lying about that. I just read 100% contradictory data. They're lying about this. They're lying about that. What else are they lying about? So when I went to school as a kid, I literally drove teachers insane. They had me on Ritalin if they'd had it back then. because I'd read something in an encyclopedia and a teacher would tell me something, and I'm just some little 8-year-old with a big mouth, and I couldn't be silenced. And they'd say something, and I'd go, well, that's not true. And they go, what? 8-year-old kid challenging me as a teacher? And I dismantled them. And I did it my entire life through school. I literally drove teachers crazy. And my dad wanted me to go in the military, but he said, you can't go in the military, because he said, you're going to spend most of your career in a military career in a military prison. Someone's going to get you to say something dumb to you, or get you to do something that'll risk your life, and you're going to knock your teeth out, and you're going to prison. So I passed up on military. Anyway, so that's how I ended up becoming a game warden. And before I was a game warden, I was a poacher and a bootlegger.
What?
Yeah, man.
I'm thinking about Carney, and now you're going to throw down poacher and bootlegger. All right. Well, I mean, come on, then. Let's hear it.
Well, so here's what happens, right? So when I got out of university, right, I was questioning everything on, and down that neck of the woods, there wasn't much to do. So we grew up drinking, driving, buddy, a lot of it. Nobody wore seatbelts back in that era, right? And it was girls and booze and running around and fast cars and the rest of it. And when I first got out of college, my grandfather owned a taxi stand when I was a kid, and all my aunts and uncles were bootleggers down there. And to me, it was just a great way to make money. And then once I became a supervisor at a local pulp mill, I said, well, maybe a couple of guys were at the door one time, and my wife at the time, we were living together. Bootleggers came to the door around 2 one morning, and I was away somewhere on a job site, and she was in the corner clutching a shotgun, and we had a chat when I got home after that one. I said, well, I think it's time to hang up it's time to wrap up my bootlegging days. And then
what were you running? What when you say bootlegging, what were you running?
Mostly rum. So back in the day, when you came down in any of these rural communities, the liquor store used to close at 6 p.m. at night, and on the weekend, Saturday, and they weren't open on Sunday. So if you missed the liquor store and you wanted to do any partying on the weekend, you had to buy extra booze. So normally, if you got a taxi driver, every taxi driver in the Maritimes, a lot of them, they always had a case of booze in the trunk. And you could get beer, you could get pints of rum or quarts of rum. And so, we'd go to the big rock concerts when I was younger. And I used to throw in a lot of wine, though, for the rock concerts, because the ladies liked wine, but quarts of rum and stuff. And back then, a pint of rum was $5, and you sold it for 10, and a quart of rum was $10, and you sold it for 20. And that was all your spending money, buddy. And I had a wild time. It was crazy. It was more fun than a man should be allowed to have. Same thing when I did the hunt and fishing show. That was more fun than a man should be allowed to have in a lifetime. It was crazy. It was so much fun. I don't know how to, I couldn't, I tried to put some of it in that book. That's why that book, it's number 1 in 3 categories. And it says it goes from the book is it's a true story where humor meets ideology. And one of the categories that it won in is political ideology, but another one's sports humor. Because I'm a hunter, fisherman, and I did all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And for a guy like me, being a game warden was just the ultimate lifestyle, man. ATVs, boats, canoes, helicopters, planes, guns, it was just an absolute adventure. But while I was doing that...
When you come back to Kearney, because I'm really curious your thoughts on this. Opposite sides of the country right now.
Yeah.
My thought when they started when Trudeau intended to resign, I was like, the damage is already done. Like, Canadians, aren't like, I don't know, this guy where I sit and talk about this 5 days a week and pay attention. Like, there's a lot that pay attention, but there's a lot that are just like you just said. They're literally hanging on to a bullet train, trying to make sure they don't drown, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
The damage is already done. They're voting Pierre Poilievre, and then over the course, but the PSYOP thing is an interesting thing, because maybe that's what I'm picking up on. I'm like, in your where you sit, like, do you think I got multiple here. Okay, they're down to 3 now. So right, they've gotten rid of Ruby, they've gotten rid of everybody, and I keep telling conservatives, why are we so shocked by this? Like, this shouldn't shock you. They did the same thing in the Conservative Party, albeit they didn't go down to 3. They had 7 at the end, but I think they started out with 10 or 11, and they axed a whole bunch they didn't want on stage, saying things they probably couldn't control. So it shouldn't shock anyone. Parties do this. It happens all the time. I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just saying it happens. But now you're like, okay, you're down to Freeland, Gold, and Kearney. And it looks like, Carney's going to be the guy. Either way, you're getting a weffer. Like, I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like, who? So Carney comes in, becomes the next prime minister of Canada. My questions are, how long is he prime minister for before there's an election called, in your thoughts? And can he win said next election?
Well, based on all the PSYOP data, I don't think he can win. He can win the leadership, but I don't think he's going to win an election. And I don't think Trump will allow it, because he will dump his team up here to make sure that the Liberals do not get in another round of power. Because he looks at us right now as the weak link in security for the U.S. We're a disaster on his northern border. Last week, I listened to an interview from Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve. I think he's a 3-star general, and he's recently retired, and he wrote a book on it. And he straight up said the Canadian military cannot secure a single border in Canada. None. He said the military has been completely demoralized. Yesterday, they just approved hiring people with ADHD and asthma to come fight in the military. Woke has just gone insane, right? Trudeau will be remembered 1,000 years from now. The only thing he'll be remembered for is tampons in the men's bathroom. But the WEF is running the show behind the scenes, and the people that pull the strings for the WEF. Justin Trudeau's WEF, Jagmeet Singh is WEF. The guy who ran the campaign for John Baird, who ran the campaign for Pierre Poilievre, WEF. CSIS has said there's over 50 people that are controlled by the CCP inside Parliament. So between CCP influence and the WEF, Trudeau had dropped the ball. He had to go. And their best case scenario was to try to implant Carney. And the loophole that Carney has is he does not have to disclose prior to if he calls an election early enough, he has a window that he does not have to disclose any of his financial conflicts of interest, and he's got a lot of them. I mean, you got to remember, over in the UK when he was there as looking after their bank over there, they called him Carnage Carney, and he dumped 56% more dollars into their economy and drove their inflation through the roof. He didn't leave there on his own accord. He got the boot, right? And they sent him back here now. And this guy's as connected as a person could be, but in the wrong way, because I can't understand why the press has given Carney a pass on his connections to Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew. My question is how many times has Mark Carney been down to Epstein Island? Why is he in all these pictures with Ghislaine Maxwell, who's now in jail as a convicted sex offender or sex trafficker? And Prince Andrew, I mean, he's been, how many allegations are there against him for being a pedo? And he actually hosted big parties for Carney over in the UK while he was there. So Carney travels with a really, really greasy, dirty crowd. And how he's getting a pass on that one in the press, I have no idea.
Well, I mean, I have an idea.
Well, the press is covering for it, and there's probably enough people. And here's the thing about it. In the line of work that he's in and the places that he's intended, I can 100%, well, I can't guarantee it, but the odds are Carney's done stuff that he's owned by the people who control him. And here's what you're going to do. Right? I can 100% guarantee it. If Mark Carney gets in, even if he's only in it, we don't go to an election in October, which, by the way, can be extended out a year. It doesn't have to be this year. That he'll bring in, the first thing he'll do is he'll bring in a digital ID. And then with his bank background, they're just holding it, waiting for the right time. It is a central bank digital currency. And if that happens, I'm out of business, you're out of business, and we're all shut down. Because they'll shut off your finances. 100% guaranteed. So Trump declared war on the censorship industrial complex about 6 weeks ago. It's one of the best speeches I've ever heard politically. And he said, I will crush the censorship industrial complex. So rather than cut it back in Canada, we're ramping it up and doubling down. We're doubling down on more woke. We're doubling down on more DEI hiring. We're doubling down on every piece of nonsense that you can imagine. I think yesterday Trudeau just gave another $5,000 million to Ukraine when they expect to have the war over here in the next week or two. $5 billion just got sent extra to Ukraine, to Zelensky, right? And I think 25 LAVs and over 1 million rounds of ammunition, and yet our troops don't have what they need to function. So either something gets fixed, buddy, or we're going to lose Canada.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if something's going to get fixed. The Donald Trump thought is interesting. Now, the PSYOP thing is interesting, too, because it makes it seem and perceive, it's just the actions that have been going on. I'm like, that's interesting, right? Yeah, I wonder how much, because like here in Western Canada, everybody's voting Pierre Poilievre. I can't, it would shock me if anyone was voting Liberal. It would just absolutely shock me. So, like, it's going to be a landslide out to the west. But as we both know, that doesn't really factor in if things don't go well at the start, right?
Yep.
And so, like, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not from out that way. You'd have a closer proximity to what the heck is happening out there in people's mindsets on whether or not they're even intrigued by the Liberal leadership race, or if they're already made up their mind and let's just like get us on to an election. The fact that we could go till October doesn't shock me because I'm like, if Carney hasn't chatted to Singh yet, which we both can say he probably has, about holding off till October and we'll get through some more NDP, whatever you want. And it's like, so it could be October, but I'm genuinely curious what the East has to say about this.
So down in my neck of the woods down here, people are highly susceptible to PSYOPs. That I will tell you. And the reason being is because down here in Nova Scotia, we only have one podcast. And the guy's name is Jeff Evely, and he does, I think it's Canadians for Freedom or Vets for Freedom. And I've been asked by 50 people to start one up down here, but I won't do it because it's a 7-day job. And I'd rather do what I'm doing here right now. I'm going to write a few more. I'm in the process of writing some more books. But I literally cannot find a person in any place I attend, coffee shops or anything, who's saying, yeah, I'm going to vote for Carney. Nobody. Zero. 100%. No, not going to happen. So when I start looking at all this support and I look at the people who are doing the polls, without seeing their poll questions, right? When they say support for Carney, well, if the question was asked, would you rather have Mark Carney dealing with Trump than Justin Trudeau? You got to remember, on a scale of 1 to 10, Trudeau's about a 0.5. Right? Max has his own set of problems because Canadians don't want another lawyer from Quebec who has trouble speaking English. I like a lot of his policies, tell you the truth. And even though my book is not the redneck conservative, I don't necessarily support anybody because down here in Nova Scotia, we started a big independent movement and got screwed over major, but that's a separate topic. We talk about it in the book. But the PSYOP is military grade level. I'm watching, I can check off every box that I see. I'm watching every single thing that's required to bring on, what did they call it, that mass psychosis? What did they call it there when... mass formation psychosis. Yeah. So that's what's happening right now. And because like Goebbels said, we wrap the issue in a flag. And Trudeau's not a scrapper. Now, don't get me wrong. Pierre Poilievre is starting to really come out as a scrapper. The guy's very, very articulate. And on a scale of 1 to 10, he's about a 5 out of 10. He's still not our savior. But he's definitely the best of the worst. Because, in my mind, Jagmeet Singh should be in jail for treason. Justin Trudeau, those 3 cases, I opened those 3 law cases against him. The Section 121 of the Criminal Code for what he did with the Ogakon and what he did with the We Charity. That's 12 years in prison, buddy, right? So why won't the police in Canada do what they need to do and restore the balance of power back to we the people? Because, and I talk about it in my book, early in the 90s, here's what's happened, Shaun. Early in the 90s across Canada, it started inside the RCMP when a guy wanted to wear his turban and carry his dirk, his knife. And went to court in front of a Liberal-appointed Supreme Court judge, and they ruled that it was a charter violation. And the Mounties started letting people not wear uniforms anymore. You could wear what you want. And then DEI hiring came in, and the RCMP, in order to get promoted inside the RCMP from the mid-90s on, you had to be full-on woke. You had to believe in DEI. So the RCMP for 3 or 4 years, if you were a 6'2" straight white guy, you weren't getting in the Mounties, buddy, for a couple of years there. And don't get me wrong, if you were 240 pounds, 5 feet tall, right, and questioning your sexuality, you got in. And now that's hiring policy at all levels of the federal government. And here in Nova Scotia, it's federal hiring policy. You checking up boxes. If you're a gay, lesbian, woodchuck, considering a sex change, right, to a goat, and you put that down on your hiring thing in Nova Scotia, by policy, they have to give you the job. You can't even make this stuff up, man. So what happens now is all levels of government are saturated with woke-tards. All levels in boardrooms of corporations that had to buy into DEI are saturated with woke-tards because they have to hire a certain number of people. And then those people gravitate up through the system because if you don't promote them, they sue you for any number of things, but mostly it's just discrimination. Well, you're discriminating against me. So when these people apply for managerial positions, they get moved in, and then they go to director, senior director, deputy minister. And then you look at what we have in Parliament right now across Canada of the 338. How many people of the 338 do you respect? And I'll wait.
I have when you started before we were chatting, and you said you don't know why you haven't been taken off of this and this and this because of how hard you go against government. I mean, at this point, we're in a situation we're in because elected officials aren't doing what they've been elected to do. So
we came up with a solution down in Nova Scotia. And the solution is, last year we started a society called the Independent Nova Scotia Initiative. And our job down in Nova Scotia, we had 55 seats down here. It's only 1.1 million people. And our goal was to, we traveled all over the province doing town halls, and we were going to convince communities to find someone highly credible whose handshake was still worth something from inside the community, and have them run as an independent. And why we picked provincial politics is because we had the perfect numbers in Nova Scotia to pull this off. So I was talking to Brian Peckford on this solution, and he said, well, Pete, I love what you're doing, but here's what you have to do. He said, independents are independents by nature, and you have to tie their hands with a contract. Other than that, they'll just run willy-nilly, and you'll lose control of them. So he said, if you can get independents to sign a performance-based contract, same as you played hockey, right?
Yep.
Okay, so when you hire up, you get a contract. If you don't meet the terms of the contract, you're gone. Same thing on jobs. When you get hired out there in the oil patch for a job, they give you a contract, and it's performance-based. And if you don't meet your performances, then based on terms of the contract, they fire you. So we come up with that down in Nova Scotia, performance-based contract for independents. And we were supposed to have a legislated election date down here on July 15th this year. And we were on track, if we'd have gone to that, to have 55 independent candidates who had signed contracts with their community that said, here's what I'm going to do, here's the timelines that we're going to do it in, and if I don't do these things, you can fire me. And in the first time in the parliamentary system in the world, you would be able to control your politicians, because politicians cannot be held accountable in Canada because of a law case. I think that came out of Alberta. It's called the what was this? I'm trying to think of the name of the case right now. I don't know where my memory's going today. It'll come back to me. The Little Child case. And the Little Child case was when a community tried to sue a politician because they were breaking their word. And now it's in precedent in Canadian courts that politicians cannot be held accountable only on election day. And we found a way to overcome that. And as a result of that, the premier down here called a snap election and kept 18 of us off the ballot in this election, and went on to win a supermajority with equipment that was recently purchased that was manufactured in China and bought from a subsidiary of Dominion Voting Machines in the U.S. And we had the lowest voter turnout in the province's history of 46%, 10% lower than the last election. And in my mind, and in most of Nova Scotians voters' mind, if less than 50% of the people turned out to vote, you don't have a mandate to do anything. Not enough people turned out. And why they didn't turn out to vote is because there was really no one to vote for. And then when they found out that 18 of us were kept off the ballot, they said, okay, system's rigged, what's going on? And we're actually in Supreme Court for a judicial review, and we've already started the process. And I'll be back in Supreme Court here in Nova Scotia on March the 6th for direction, and then we go to a judicial review. And after the judicial review, very likely we'll be going to a charter challenge with this one will win, because they threw an unfair roadblock in front of us down here, and you're not allowed to throw any kind of market roadblock in front of somebody running in politics. So behind the scenes, we'll educate Canada just a little bit. Most people don't understand how candidates get picked. Every riding, there's 338 ridings across Canada. I was the president of Halifax West Conservative Association for 3 years. And when it comes time for election, what you do is every one of those ridings for the parties, they form what's called a candidate selection committee. And sometimes there's only 3 or 4 people on that committee. And their job is to go out and find a candidate who can be controlled, manipulated, looks good, someone they can market, but ultimately will play ball. And that's the way the system works. And then when you wonder, like, where do these people come from? Well, they come from because someone went out and found them. And it's rarely the person who puts up their hand and says, pick me. We found down here that the first person to put up their hand and say, pick me, was invariably going into politics for the wrong reason. They were going in to line their pockets. Right? And then when they found out about this contract thing, they went, well, I don't think I want to sign that. Well, if you don't sign it, we're not going to help you. And so when the forest fire thing happened here in Canada, when I got a call for Reiner Fulmick, we talked about this, and he said, Pete, I'm going to run this by all my people that I know around the world. Because he said, if you can pull it off in Nova Scotia, that'll become a blueprint on how to do it all across Canada and every other parliamentary system, especially down in Australia where they're getting reamed hard time. They got it worse down there than we do because they took all their guns. They gave them all up a long time ago. So, and then he got ramroded into jail, right? But we're trying to make changes. And that's why I get a chance to go on any of these shows, Shaun. That's why I wrote that book. Because I was 100%, they took me off Twitter. And then when it was Twitter, and then they were like Facebook or anything I tried to get on, when I started talking about what I'm talking about now, man, I was being shut down. When I first opened that complaint against Trudeau, CSIS opened a file on me. They did an audit on me, wouldn't give me my HST rebates in my business. And I remember my CPA saying to me, he said, man, you need to shut up and go away, bud. Once the government's come after you, they won't let go. And I said, really? Well, I'm going to work inside politics and find out who touched this file. And every one of you sons of bitches is going to be fired. It's going to be like Doge down in the U.S. We're down in, having Kash Patel heading the FBI, and then they just brought in as his number 2 man is Dan Bongino. Heads are going to roll, buddy. And here in Canada, the same thing has to happen. The level of corruption that has been uncovered by Sam Cooper, and if you haven't interviewed him yet, you got to interview him.
Yeah, Sam was on the show a couple weeks ago. Yeah,
and I mean, the stuff he's blowing the lid off, it's catastrophic, man. And here's the thing is, he doesn't even have time to check out the East Coast. I sent him an email here last week, and he said, Pete, love to help out. But he said, man, I'm bogged down in the middle of what I'm doing. You got up in Ontario, they're having a provincial election. Every elections organization inside provincial government, federal government has to be checked. And the question needs to be asked, how many Chinese people are now working inside the elections department? Down here in Nova Scotia, we have a Chinese person who handles all the IT for our election. All of it. You can't make this shit up, man.
It don't give me a whole lot of hope that things are going to get better anytime soon, You go, it's a massive psyop and they got no support. But it looks like they got key people in different spots. And that's what, Sam Cooper would point out, right? Like,
yeah.
And then, I don't know. It isn't just corruption in politics. It's corruption in politics, sure.
Sure.
But it's corruption in the,
it's way beyond.
Corruption in the judicial system, right?
Yep. And corruption in all policing too. Like, don't get me wrong. Over my career, Shaun, I worked with a lot of good Mounties, fisheries officers, we worked with everybody, local police departments. We overlapped on a bunch of things that we did. But the issue was a lot of those guys all get in at the bottom line, at the bottom end, thinking they were going to make a difference. And then they realized, okay, I got to play this woke bullshit to move up through the echelons. So right now, there's nobody, and I mean nobody. There's nobody in any justice departments that will do their job. I'll give you an example. Those RCMP investigations in Ottawa have to be launched in Ottawa where the crime was committed against Trudeau. So even if the RCMP, somebody over there, took the yellow stripe that was normally on their leg pants and put it on their back and took it off their back and actually stood up and followed their oath of office and laid charges against them, then you still have to find a Crown prosecutor who wants to go after the government. And without a Crown prosecutor, the RCMP won't move ahead, although right now my understanding someone's pushing a private prosecution against Trudeau now. Well, what happens is a Crown prosecutor will not take on the government in most cases because ultimately they're appointed by the government to become judges. And if you don't play ball, you ain't getting appointed to a judge. And then as a judge, if you don't play ball, you ain't ever being a Supreme Court judge. The whole system right now, I think 90%, it's like over 90% of our Senate right now are woke-tards that have been appointed as liberals.
Yeah, 90 have been appointed.
90 of them. You know, the average person in there right now, I don't mean to be all that tough on them, but the average IQ is like room temperature. These people are corrupted and incapable of doing what they're supposed to do. So I will give you hope, because here's where hope comes from. There's enough of us out there now telling people what we're telling them here today that hopefully some of them will start questioning. And here's what happens. You'll just be driving down the road one day and you'll be going, well, I just heard that on the news, but I know for a fact what they just said is a lie. And people don't understand when you really figure out how much you've been lied to. You'll have a grief reaction. I know people that got screwed up for a year, man, that were a mess going. And then they start going down all these rabbit holes. That book of mine, that's got enough. I hunted rabbits my whole life. I shot thousands of them. There's thousands of rabbit holes in that book for you to go down. You read that book, you're not going to be the same again. I'll tell you right now. And if you want solutions, they're in that. And that'll some people go, well, that can't be true. Well, just go do the research. I don't make any statements without backing the stuff up with research, right? So here's the thing is, it only takes 3% of a fully awoke population to make changes. That's all it takes. And if there's enough people in the right situation that get woke up and go, well, this is just absolute criminal. And somewhere, someone, it's like with the vaccine issue. I've got 64 friends now dead since COVID started. And I'm willing to bet at least 60 of them were vaccine injured. And there hasn't been, not one of them had a VAERS report filled out. None of them. I mean, some of the craziest turbo cancers and heart attacks and blood clots and all kinds of shit that with healthy people and stuff, it's just insane. But what happens is someone somewhere is going to be affected by enough of this that they're going to stand up and they're going to say, there was the guy said in the movie, he said, I'm just not going to take it anymore. And then, you know, I got 6 grandkids that are expecting their grandfather to toe the mark and not leave them with this shit show that's been created for them. And I'm determined to do it. And I got a special skill set so that the government tends to leave me alone. You know, like seriously. So, but they'll still come after you if they can. But the reality of it is we need more people to reach down by their own bootstraps, pull themselves and man up. It's time for every man in Canada to stop listening to this bullshit and man up and say, I'm not going to put up with this stuff anymore. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the country, if we get 4 more years of a liberal government, Canada's done. And I believe sincerely that Donald Trump will not allow his northern neighbor to become full-on controlled by the Chinese and become a socialist regime on his northern border. I just don't think they'll allow it. I think that strategically, have you ever read The Art of War?
No, actually, I haven't.
That's a book. There's 2 books every Canadian should read to kind of understand what's going on. One is The Art of the Deal, which I've read twice, Trump's book. If you want to understand Trump, go read his book. You want to understand me, go read that book. You know, The Redneck Conservative. Read that book, The Art of the Deal, and then go read the Sun Tzu, The Art of War. So The Art of War would be, let Carney get in power before you take him out, before he goes into the next election. Because if they have a leadership convention and you take him out first, for example, then we may end up with, if Carney got taken out now with data that the U.S. government has on him, maybe let's say in relation to Epstein Island. Because Pam Bondi has that sitting on her desk right now ready to release it. All the names of everybody who was at Epstein Island. And so if you take Carney out too early, what the ideal thing would be to let him win and then blow the whistle on him, and then they're screwed. Right? If information comes out after he's elected, he finds himself heading to a jail cell for stuff he's been involved in. Well, that would be the ideal art of war, because the ideal of war is to win without ever firing a shot. And so if Carney won before Trump releases enough, and don't get me wrong, people are going to say, well, that's crazy conspiratorial, until you've been behind the scenes in politics like I have for 12 years. And then you realize that's not conspiratorial at all. That's just the art of war. And if they decided to take him out, then the only other person to go to would be Chrystia Freeland. And what most Canadians aren't aware of, that Chrystia Freeland's grandfather was a Nazi propagandist in Ukraine during World War II. And she taught, and then George Soros financed her run to be in politics. She was going to do an autobiography of him. She was good friends with him. And the Russians kicked her out of Russia in her early 20s because they labeled her as a Ukrainian spy and codenamed her Frida. She had codename Frida, you're not coming back to Russia. And then as finance minister, she oversaw $18,000 million go to people in the Ukraine when the Ukraine actually had the Azov battalion, which is still a full Nazi battalion. And that was the battalion that was responsible for roughly the 14,000 people from 2014 moving forward that got slaughtered in the Donbass area that most Canadians don't even know what I'm talking about right now. Right? So the last person that we need, if Carney gets taken out, if it was me coordinating stuff in the U.S., I'd say let him go in, then we'll take him out. And then they've got Chrystia Freeland. And because she screwed up the economy so bad, Pierre Poilievre will walk back in and clean house.
The only issue I have with that, not an issue, I guess. The only thing I guess I'm curious about is it makes it seem like the U.S. is so smart, and they're going to let him walk in, and then they're going to boop, and he's out, and we move on with it. I'm like, but everything up to this point, although it's been a house of cards falling all around him as all these different shows and podcasts and everything have really just every time they do something, people just start talking about it.
Yeah.
And when people start talking, you can understand why they want bills in place so they can stop people from talking.
Yeah.
Because when people talk, do you get it all right? No, 100% not. But then you start to, I hadn't thought about it that way. And, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So my only issue is the WEF and the people that are with Carney and that side of things. They seem pretty dedicated. I don't know what the word is. But they're going down this path. And they're not ones to not think that the U.S. is probably going to do something like that. That they're going to, what's one of the game plans we're going to have? Well, if Carney goes in, they might pull out these things. I mean, Donald Trump is now the president.
Oh, yeah.
And they probably have things in place. Like, I guess, to me, I'm just like, it's acting like the game's already won. And the thing is when two sides are going at it, what's their next play, I guess, is what I'm curious about.
What, in the U.S.?
Carney's side.
Oh, with Carney's side?
If they come out and they say, oh, you were at Epstein Island. Like, how does they, just because they control the media, they're going to try and frame it a certain way? Is that the play?
So they've been able to do it so far because, okay, you haven't heard anything on mainstream media at all about his connections with Ghislaine Maxwell at all.
Correct.
I mean, that's just a matter of fact. And then, being hosted by Prince Andrew, who just basically, I mean, I don't know how many trips he made down to Epstein Island. And then, okay, then you have to ask yourself, why has Pam Bondi not brought out that list yet of everybody who's been to Epstein Island? Well, why don't we just hold on to it till the end of, see what happens up in Canada? And let's put Mark Carney in position first before we release the Epstein Island list. If you understand the art of war, and most people don't understand either, is that Trump is a master chess player. He was a master chess player. He used to win tournaments and stuff. And he's playing master chess with people in Canada who can't play checkers. I'll give you an example. When he announced what was going to happen with the border, that didn't come out of his mouth first. Actually, he got Justin Trudeau to say that to him at that dinner right after he got in. Remember when Trudeau jumped on a plane and went down right away, and he was down there, I think, at Thanksgiving or something with Trump. So he asked Justin, he said, so Justin, I put these tariffs on, what's going to happen? He said, well, you're going to destroy our economy. And he said, and then he said, we're not going to be taking advantage of it anymore. And then Justin said, yeah, well, if that's the case, we might as well be, it was Justin who said we may as well be a 51st state. And he said, well, then I guess you'll be the governor. And that's what he said to him. So the first time that came out of anybody's mouth, it came out of Justin Trudeau's mouth. And then Donald Trump went, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Maybe we'll run with that. But initially it came out of Trudeau's mouth. So here's the thing, is when he first announced tariffs, what people don't understand with a master chess player is he gave every politician in Canada an IQ test. And the only person who passed was Daniel Big Ball Smith out in Alberta. And that woman had enough guts and gumption to get on a plane and fly down and go down and have dinner with the man and start negotiating. And Trump told Canada straight up, okay, so you got to remember, three of his negotiating team are three of the top negotiators on earth, the very best of the best. These guys that he has doing negotiations on behalf of the U.S. right now when it comes to economics. So they would have monitored every politician in Canada, and they would have been tracking them. I don't care if it was military, but they would have been tracked. What are the reactions? Let's dig into all the intel. Give me a file on every one of the premiers. And they would all come back basically as buffoons, completely incapable of negotiations. They have no idea what they're doing most of the time. I mean, I just watch stuff from the inside, and I deal with people in business and stuff that just shake their head continually and say, well, they don't think they can fix it. They just say, how can we navigate it and maybe survive? When Trump first started talking tariffs, he wanted three things, right? He wanted the fentanyl issue to end. He wanted leaky borders to end, right? And then he wanted unfair tactics. People don't realize that Canada only spends 1.5% of what they were supposed to be spending, or 1.5% of our GDP on our military when we had agreed to spend 3%. That's $40 billion a year that was supposed to go into our military that didn't go into it, which meant the U.S. was picking up the slack for the last God knows how many years. Well, over 10 years, that's close to $500 billion that the Canadian government didn't have to pay because they knew Big Brother in the U.S. was going to take care of us in the event of an attack. So just on that alone, there's $40 billion a year that Canada is supposed to be investing in military that they don't do. And as a matter of fact, I saw Sam Cooper just come out half an hour ago saying that the U.S. is now seriously looking at removing Canada from the Five Eyes intelligence program because the system is so corrupted. There's nobody in enforcement or in the military in Canada that can be trusted with highly sensitive, secretive documents anymore. You can't even make this shit up, man. So here's how we fix it. Rather than being just the peddler of doom, is I want everybody to start thinking critically and start asking questions. And if it doesn't make sense and you dig into it, it's probably not going to make sense. And you're going to say, who's making these decisions? And then you start finding out some guy hired who was a DEI hired who shouldn't be there. And you know what a DEI hire does when they get in a key management position? They hire dummies around them. You know what real leaders do? They hire people smarter than themselves. And people, if they can identify an area of weakness, let's hire a guy who's good at that. And they hire people that will stand up to them and say, am I screwing something up here? And they go, no, Mr. Trudeau, no, I'm not worthy of being in a room with you. And then they go, no, you do this and you're going to destroy this. That's why Trump surrounds himself with a bunch of people. Don't realize it, but he does surround himself with a bunch of people that if he's screwing up, they tell him. Trudeau is surrounded by so many sycophants that it's nauseating. I can't even look at them together. My wife gets physically sick hearing Trudeau's voice on the TV. Carney is worse than Trudeau by a factor of about at least 10. At least 10. So what we need is 3 to 4% of Canada to be fully awake, and then they can start influencing friends around them, because a lot of this stuff will get solved in a Tim Hortons. The people sitting around, when the average person starts going, I caught them lying to me there the other day on the news. What's up with that? And then you get about, somebody else says, don't talk so foolish. And then the next thing you know, you've got about 6 or 7 people say, I was asking questions about that. The last thing the government wants you doing is asking questions. And that's why they were trying to push through Bill 63 and some of that stuff. And that's why I was confident my book was that book right there you see behind me. If that legislation went through, you'd probably be interviewing me from a cell. I'd be beaten down Barris with a tin cup, begging for bread and water, if that was allowed to go through. And you'd be shut down, and most anybody speaking up would be shut down. Anyway, it's not shutting me down, buddy. Ain't ever going to happen. I was a stick in the spokes when I was a kid, and now I'm a log in the spokes. Right?
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Peter. I'm like, I don't even know what to say at this point. I'm like, there's so many things going on.
Yeah.
I try and stay on top of it. And at times I'm like, I think I got it. And then at times I'm like, meh, I just got to go read The Art of War, right? Like I'm like, I should probably just go read the book. It's been on my list of things to do for quite some time. And now you're making a very valid case on maybe you should just go read that.
Yeah.
And understand the forces that are at play here. Because I'm watching it. I'm literally watching it. I talk about it all the time, right? You talk to Sam Cooper, we just had him on. Talked about it.
When you go read that book, Shaun, you're going to be going, holy shit, holy shit. Man, look at that. That's why oh my God, that's why that happened. Buddy, it's in the art of war. And it's also in the art of the deal. People don't understand when Trump originally threw something out, that tariff could have been pushed down the road at least 6 months. All Trudeau had to do was do what he was asked to do. The problem is we don't have the military, we don't have the staff and the people to be able to control the border. And the U.S. has already said, same thing Sam said, is that border control is it's fully corrupted. You can't give them information; it'll get used. There's so much money in the fentanyl trade. You know how many people are being bought off? It's just insane. And nobody's even bothering coming to Nova Scotia and talking about what's going down here. Like, there's only a couple of voices in the wind down here, and I'm one of them. And, like I say, I get jammed up virtually on everything. Now I'm working with Wayne Peters and them on Freedom Train International. We'll be doing a thing this Saturday night, a 4-hour live stream. And I'll have that Dr. Daniel Nagase on it, talking about some of the stuff he's been through. And we'll have guests from all over the world on that show. And the nice thing about it is on a show like this, Shaun, you're allowed to actually tell people what's really happening. And in my 29-year career, buddy, I wasn't allowed to tell nobody nothing. You just shook your head.
Yeah, one of the things about this realm as it sits today is you can say whatever the heck you want on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, I go back to the early days of COVID when we were doing the same thing, and you don't have to agree with everybody who comes on. Actually, I would prefer it if you didn't, because I don't know if anyone who comes on here says everything just bang on perfect. I know they don't, but it helps build a picture of what's going on in your community all the way up to our country. And I wonder, when you say, well, nobody's come out to Nova Scotia, well then, are you pointing directly at the election? Is that what you mean by what's been going on in Nova Scotia?
Well, it's not just that. We've been flooded by immigration. And, we've got people here way up in the political realm here in Nova Scotia that are on board of directors of companies that get paid every time immigrants come into Nova Scotia. And our premier wants to double our population here by 2050. And the average price of a house here has doubled since 2019. The cost of living up down here is atrocious. We've got the highest per capita tax of any province in Canada. Our gas prices are insane. And we have virtually no hope in sight because we're being flooded continually by immigrants. When I grew up in Nova Scotia, buddy, there was no food banks. There was no tent towns. People freeze to death down here, in the winter now in tent towns. People, had seen a lineup outside of a food bank here 4 years ago was unheard of. Man, you can see them 100 deep on a good day outside a food bank now here in Nova Scotia. Potholes in the road. Everything is just, everywhere as I look, there's someone somewhere in charge who's just a confirmed simpleton. And I go, how did they get there? The other thing down here in Nova Scotia, we've got probably 5,500 people in the Masons. And our Nova Scotia government is saturated with Mason appointees. Secret handshake club, buddy. Now that's the one that'll really get you in trouble. That's the one that I really have to watch out for now.
Is the Masons?
Yeah, you start talking about Masons like that, buddy, you're gonna find yourself nudged off the road by an 18-wheeler. For real.
My naivety is going to ask it, so hold on, folks. Do you really think that they'd nudge you off the road for talking about the Freemasons?
Here's what happens is a lot of the decisions inside government are controlled at almost all upper echelons. Our premier's a Mason. $17 billion budget, buddy. Our number 2 trading partner right now here in Nova Scotia is China. Our port is now controlled, our container terminal is now controlled out of Shanghai. When Stephen Harper was in power, he had legislation put in place that our major ports had to stay in Canadian control. And one of the very first things Trudeau did when he got in was lift that restriction. I'm not kidding. Go look it up, man. Go find out who runs the container terminals in Halifax. There's so much big money and there's so many things, and the picture is so much bigger than most people realize. Most people's lives revolve around what's on TV. What am I doing Saturday night? I'm worked to death all week. I'm stuck in traffic. I can't afford gas. I'd like to be able to afford a 2-4 beer, but now it's like $60 almost down here in Nova Scotia. It's just insane. So like I said, Shaun, people don't have time to dig into some of the stuff that I have time to dig into. Anytime you start threatening things, go ask Sam Cooper if he worries about what may happen to him. Man, you start exposing major things and accidents happen to people. I know it sounds crazy.
Nah, it doesn't sound crazy at all. I just in my okay, you're going to be episode 8. What is it? 803, folks. I hope I'm right on that. Anyways, 800 episodes. Now, you can knock off 200 of them because it took until roughly episode 200 to start talking about COVID. And then from that point on, it has been a journey.
You betcha.
And in 600 episodes, I'm trying to think right now, and I would love if the audience would chime in. I don't think anyone's brought up the Masons. Now, that doesn't mean there hasn't been conversations in the background, and that doesn't mean you can't just because it hasn't been brought up that it's not a real thing or what have you. But is it as taboo a word as what you're making it out to be? I'm curious about that because here in this show, you look both ways, but I go, at one point, saying COVID out loud was about as taboo as it got. It was real world implications. I sat and watched it sitting in this chair. I'm like, Masons, that's the next one that I'm going to, I guess I'm just curious about it.
So here's what happens. I was invited to join the Masons a couple of different times, and I always laughed about it. To me, it was like Fred Flintstone, Water Buffalo Lodge, Ack, secret handshake shit. And I didn't want to be involved. But then I started watching people that I knew, going into supervisory positions and management and senior directors. And then I'm watching it all across provincial government here in Nova Scotia. And then I really got to realize the level of power that they have. It's staggering. And it's in every province across Canada, buddy, and people don't talk about it. They don't talk about it because you have secret oaths and you've got a whole bunch of things. It's no different than at the Skull and Bones down in the U.S. All the presidents that were members of the Skull and Bones at one of the universities, right? And so what happens is most people at the lower levels of Masons don't realize the problems at the upper levels of Masons. Because once you go above level 30, you're asked to do certain things that I've known friends of mine that had to walk away from the Masons and said, I'm not doing that. So people don't understand, and you're not privy to that information until you hit those levels. So, you can start digging around in it, but of all the things that I've talked about here on the day, the number one thing that's going to cause me problems is bringing this up. Guaranteed.
That's a pretty wild statement when I think about it,
Well, look into out in BC too. Go find out who some of your top people are, and find out all you got to do is just watch the way people stand. Watch when they shake a person's hand. Watch when a brother Mason shakes hand with another Mason. I've been in and people were shaking my hand, and I went, man, what kind of a handshake was that? And then I found later it's a secret Mason handshake. Or were you one of the traveling men, or your brother? All the kind of stuff, buddy. That's just one more big-ass rabbit hole to go down. That book of mine, I probably got 100 holes for people to get down. The nice thing about it, though, is, I give in that the book's available in audio and ebook. So if you get it in audio, those are live links, and you can click on a bunch of that stuff that's in there. You can't do it with the written book, but man, oh man, if you want to do some research, you got somebody you want to wake up, go give them that book. If they're a liberal, don't let them read it during the summertime in a wooded area because their head will explode. Then we'll get a forest fire, and then you will have people who will let it burn because they're DEI hires and don't know how to put the fire out.
And then they'll call it climate change.
And then they'll call it climate change. Same thing that happened in Jasper last year. You know that big fire in Jasper? Did you know that 50 highly trained firefighters showed up with 20 pieces of the best heavy equipment to fight fires in Jasper, and the federal government would not allow them to fight that fire? And they stood there and watched houses burn to the ground. Most people don't know that either, buddy. And same thing happened here in Nova Scotia, right?
Well, sitting here, we've I don't know, I've talked to enough people around it. California would be the same way, right? Forest management was piss poor. I think that's putting it lightly.
Mildly.
And just go listen to everything that's been uncovered through the government, talking to the officials and hearing their stories. We've had forest management companies come on and talk about, parts that didn't burn is because they were actually taken care of, and other parts certainly weren't, and it was just waiting to happen. It was sitting there, and it was a ticking time bomb, and off it went. So, yeah.
So even in Jasper. So I monitor everything that was happening down in the U.S. there in those LA fires. I was actually had an opportunity to go down. There was private homeowners that were paying up to, for people like myself who are trained under ICS who could go down, $1,000 an hour to go down and fight fires down there or protect their homes because their insurance had been canceled. So you got a $10 million home and you got to pay some redneck to come down, a couple of guys to come down and keep your house from burning down. It cost you $1,000 an hour, big deal, right? But the fact of the matter is why I wouldn't go down, because I looked at the levels of management and everybody that was involved in it, and they were all DEI hires. It was an absolute, it was one of the biggest clusters I've ever witnessed, ever. And I've seen some bad shit.
The thing I see with DEI, I bring up Atlas Shrugged a bunch on this show because, like, you read Atlas Shrugged, and in that
Read that
book,
too.
it's about railways, right? And eventually it all falls apart. And DEI is doing that right now to whole chunks of society. And the latest is the air industry. Like, I mean, a plane landing on its roof in Toronto is about as wild as it gets.
Yeah.
And yet it just happened, right? And you look at that and you're like, well, they can try and tell me it's not DEI, but we all know it is.
All DEI hires on that plane, buddy. Every one of them. Right? So here's what happens is on shows like this, you're still allowed to say it. In government, no matter what you're seeing, you can't speak up. We don't have really good whistleblower protection here in Canada. And most people, Trudeau, what he had, 40% more federal government hires. And I lost track of how many of them are making six-figure income. And nobody wants to risk it because even at six figures today, if you're a family of four, buddy, I don't know how you get by. I just don't. I really don't. I'm glad my kids are all grown up and gone and stuff. But man, oh man. And then I look at, just things like milk and eggs. And Trump's got a good point down in the U.S. because Quebec has supply management. We're paying over roughly 300% tariffs on poultry, cheese, milk, a bunch of stuff, and butter and things. I don't know. When I was a kid packing groceries, a pound of butter was 35 cents. Now I'm getting up there. But the reality of it is, my wife told me the other day that a pound of butter in some places now is $9. Can that be true? Is it that much money?
Yeah, honestly, I think it is.
So I found an old photo album. I was going through some stuff here last week, and there was I had a 1967 dollar bill with it was Expo Canada on it. And when I put that in there, you could buy 10 large coffees with that dollar bill. And today you can't buy a half a medium with the same dollar bill, not a half of one. It's insane, is what happened over my lifetime, what I've watched happen. And I feel bad because I sat back, didn't get involved in politics. And people say, I don't want to be involved in politics. Well, buddy, I tell you, politics wants to be involved in you. And it's going to control every facet of your life if you don't stand up and make a stand and grow
right.
and say something.
Peter, as we're talking, Donald Trump has tweeted out, our country's doing really well, and today I was just thinking the company building the Keystone XL pipeline that was viciously jettisoned by the incompetent Biden administration should come back to America and get it built. Now, in capitals, ! I know they were treated very badly by sleepy Joe Biden, but the Trump administration is very different. Easy approvals, almost immediate start. If not them, perhaps another pipeline company. We want Keystone XL pipeline built. And then Daniel Smith's already said, I agree.
What can we do?
Yeah.
But here's the thing with Mark Carney. So Mark Carney turned down he financed multiple pipeline operations on other continents, but behind the scenes, he helped crush pipelines here in Canada. Most people aren't aware of that. You got to remember, he was the ultimate backroom guy, dealing with the Laurentian elites, giving advice to what needed to be done here in Canada to run our economy. And there's nobody who's a bigger supporter of carbon taxation than Mark Carney. And even though he said, well, he's going to cancel he's not canceling anything. He's going to only shift that temporarily to industry, and it's going to trickle down, and we're all going to pay for it. And if he ever finds his way in power, he'll just wait. And it won't, as soon as he's in solid, not just as the leadership, but if they were to go back and win again, they would tack that back on us so fast your head would spin. Yeah. And you can't hold them accountable because they don't have performance contracts. And that plan that we had down here with performance contracts just doesn't threaten political power in Canada. That would jeopardize political power in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the U.S. Everybody.
It's true. What was the reception like from the everyday person?
Loved it. It was the best idea they'd ever heard, buddy.
So in the election, did you run any independents then?
No, we couldn't get through too. There was another small party that had, they got collapsed, and two of their people went over and ran as independents because they already had an auditor that was available to work with them. But they weren't picked from inside the community, and they failed dramatically. Everything that we did, we had went into communities, and the community found people they wanted them to run. And what happened was that the government, we cannot allow this to happen. So our premier broke his first piece of legislation, called a snap election, and then Elections Nova Scotia would not let us get through the system because they changed the legislation here in 2020 that in order to run, you have to get an auditor that's accredited, a CPA accredited to do audits. And prior to 2020, we had 5,000 accountants in the province. And overnight, they dropped that pool down to 142. And we had a by-election last May down here, and we had a guy who couldn't get in because he couldn't get an accountant. We called all 142 accountants. It couldn't get any of them to agree to audit the account of an independent. And so we had just, before this election got called, and while we were setting everything up down, because I'm telling you how orchestrated this is, because right now we're tampering with the major levers of power worldwide by what we're doing in this little old province of ours down here. And that's why I mentioned about the truck. By the way, I'm not suicidal ever, just so that you're certain. And I have what's called situational awareness on everything around me. So the odds, they're going to have to work hard to take me out. But the reality of it is there's so much money threatened by what we're doing behind this. So there was 18 of us that tried to get through the process. 9 of us got through the entire process to get fully rejected, and none of us could get access to accountants because they weren't available. So under the Act, there's sections of the Act that contradict one another. So that's where we are in the judicial review. But what was put in front of us was what's called a market hindrance to being able to run for office. It's like me saying to you, Shaun, look, I got a job. We're going to pay you $300,000. You got to be in Halifax in 5 days, and you got to arrive in a DeLorean. You ain't finding a DeLorean to get here for the job. It's the same thing with the independents. We did everything we were supposed to try to find accountants, and all the accountants claimed either a conflict of interest or they just didn't want to do it. So we couldn't get the accountants that we needed. And so Elections Nova Scotia used that. So the commissioner of elections.
Sorry, Peter. How did they take it from that many? And I don't know if my figure was correct, but the last number you said was 142. How did they take it down from thousands upon thousands to 142? What was their criteria?
You had to take a special course to audit election campaigns. And there's only 142 of them. And the 142 doesn't meet. I'll give you an example. If there was an independent running all ridings, that's 55. You could have 10 independents running the same riding. That'd be 550. And the auditors weren't there, and the government put that roadblock in front of independents running because the parties only need one.
So you're going to take, this is going to court. This is already, already like in the process of this.
Yep.
Assuming you get the best possible news, which means they did something that was illegal or they, does that trigger another election, or you have to wait till the next election?
The Supreme Court in Canada right now, which is heavily liberal biased,
yes,
very likely won't overturn it because it will affect them, even though our government down here is a progressive conservative. They're not real conservatives. They're a progressive conservative government provincially. They probably won't overturn this election for wrongdoing because it sets a tremendously bad precedent. And so what will end up happening, they'll have to change the election to open the door for us so that we can run independents in any by-elections. And I think what will happen with the charter challenge, we'll win the charter challenge, but that will set precedent for all provinces. And that'll level the playing field from here on in. And then they're going to have to, there's a bunch of things that end up, because they're going to have to issue remedies. And we're very, very confident that we're going to win the charter challenge.
When do you find, like, how long do you think until you, with the charter challenge? Like,
well, we want to complete the judicial review first. And the judicial review has a high probability of leaning towards a win for us, which will force changes to the Election Act. And then I don't know what they're going to do, because if they kept 18 people off a ballot, do you go back and have by-elections? You can't have an unbiased by-election now, because with a supermajority, anybody that's going into voting originally, they had no idea. They thought if we get enough independents, the goal was to get enough independents to control the legislature. And then it's the same thing out in BC right now, right? And it's the same thing that Jagmeet Singh is doing. Well, that's what we wanted to do with independents, but we wanted to do it with independents that were handcuffed with performance contracts. So they have to do what the voter wants them to do. And so our goal, if we'd have got enough independents, we could have started putting in legislation to change the entire system. We could have unwound DEI. We could have unwound all kinds of garbage. And then when the population saw how effective we were, we'd have enough chance in the next provincial election to maybe form government, because people don't realize up in the Northwest Territories, there's no parties. It's all independents. So it's already proven that the system can work. Up there, though, they haven't learned to tie their hands with the contract yet. And like I said, I got to give credit where credit's due, and that credit goes strictly through to Brian Peck. That was his idea, and we're the guys implementing.
Well, I appreciate you hopping on it and doing this today. I think a lot to think about, and certainly some new things that we hadn't heard, and especially coming on the opposite side of the country. It's always good to, link up and hear different perspectives on obviously a similar problem we're all facing. But appreciate you hopping on and doing this today.
Yeah, big time. I got a sister out there in Calgary and a daughter out in Airdrie, and I got friends from coast to coast now. And you know what? I made more friends since I started coming up speaking about this, like real people that'll have your back. And probably I even made growing up my entire life. One thing COVID did, it taught you who you can trust and who you can't. And it was 100%. An eye-opening experience to find out the ones that you couldn't, that were going to fold like a deck of cards.
Yeah.
Anyways, look, I really appreciate on, and if any of your folks get a chance to pick up that book before they ban it, I would appreciate it. The nice thing about that, if I do get banned or I do get nudged off the road, right, you can always even if I get fully censored, if you have a copy of that book, that's something you can hand to a friend.
Where can they find it, Peter?
Amazon.
Amazon, yep.
It's on. You can get it on Amazon, and it's on Audible. And most people don't read books today. I actually sat down and I created the Audible myself. So you're going to get my accent.
Which would be
apparently
perfect.
I still have one. I didn't even know I had one, but people tell me I still got a little bit.
You still got one.